Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we're going to be diving into episodes 677 through 679, which will cover manga chapters 743 and 744, and one page of 745. This is where we get to see the chaos that Dressrosa's Operation SOP has caused, and we get to witness the birth of a god. So, synopsis. All the toys in Dressrosa have finally returned to their original forms, causing massive chaos throughout the city, and in this, the former prisoners begin to revere their savior, Usopp, as a god, while Sabo finally achieves victory, carrying on Ace's will by coming out the victor in the tournament. Alright, so differences. There aren't as many added filler scenes, but they do change up the sequencing quite a bit, hence the additional page from chapter 745 being moved up. So the big one at the beginning is there's this sort of opening voiceover montage with Leo and Kuros kind of laying out what's to come next in the anime, while the manga kind of just begins with Sugar already knocked out and on the floor, so we don't get this sort of recap / preview of what's to come. The manga also doesn't have that scene where Usopp does sort of the fake out death. He kind of like comedically dies, and then everybody's like all sad about him, but he's actually just fine. That scene is not in the manga. In the anime, it also shows Rebecca remembering her father Kuros, and it shows various memories from her perspective. This was also not in the manga. And then lastly, after Sabo and Koala kind of explain to Rebecca about the weapons, the anime moves a huge chunk of chapter 745 up to this point. And so scenes of Frankie getting back up, Zoro lost once again outside the palace, now chasing Pika, as well as the scene where Kinemon is mistaken for the real Doflamingo once again, but is attacked by all the slaves that were wanting to take revenge, and then also Robin reuniting with her Revolutionary Army friends. All of those are from chapter 745, and this scene was moved up in the anime, while in the manga, the scene that originally follows this moment is the continuation of Kuros attacking the rest of the Don Quixote members in the suits room, particularly his sort of mini skirmish with Buffalo. Those were kind of the major changes that I noticed, so let's get on to the episodes themselves. And Sugar has finally been defeated by Usopp, and the curse of the Hobi Hobi fruit has now been lifted. And all of a sudden, everyone around Dressrosa is returning to their human forms, with everyone's memory also being restored as well. Although, leave it to Toei to make Robin transforming back into a human needlessly sexual and very fan-servicey by having the camera focus on her butt and boobs bouncing when they transform, when the manga just uses sort of a wide shot of her entire torso, going from toy to human. So, I don't even know at this point. This was a huge moment for Dressrosa's arc, though, and was a huge turning point, sending us into sort of the beginning of the climax of the arc. And you knew this was a big deal, and we're kind of on this edge of your seat to see what would happen next, because all hell was about to break loose. There were so many questions spinning around in your head about how everyone would react, what would they do. The gladiators were all rightfully pissed, but would they help and fight the Straw Hats on their side? You know, how would the citizens of Dressrosa also respond to the ensuing conflict? And would Fujitora and the Marines, what would they do now? As well as a restored Kuros and Luffy are now ready to take down Doflamingo. How will they proceed? So, yeah, a lot was happening at once, and this was an insane moment in the story of One Piece. Like, this was actually quite an emotional scene, as well, you know, seeing everyone get what they once lost. And I'm okay with the anime milking this scene for fillers, because it deserves that amount of attention. I liked seeing everyone's reaction to everyone else returning and having those extra sort of moments, even though, you know, they're included by Toei. I still think they did a good job with it, and I liked giving that sort of moment the significance that it deserves. However, just as I just gave Toei props, one thing the anime does not convey all that well is Doflamingo's rage when he learns from Treble that Sugar has been knocked out. In the anime, he just kind of angrily says, "What kind of joke is this?" But in the manga, that panel is drawn in a way that shows just how seething with intense rage of 1,000 suns he has right now. It's an insane close-up of his face. Most of it is shadowed with gritted teeth. The anime almost makes no attempt to even come close to replicating this emotion. And one thing that's become very clear is that Doflamingo was transforming everyone and anything, including wild animals, which is crazy. And everyone on the island now wants to take down Doflamingo, and we are all for it. But yeah, go back and look at that panel where Doflamingo says that, what kind of a joke is this? Like, it's pretty viscerally different from what's depicted in the anime to what his face looks like in the manga. It's crazy. There is something so satisfying seeing all the people who've been enslaved and beaten finally get their chance to exact their revenge, not just on Doflamingo, but all the henchmen as well. Of course, the most significant return of all this is the members of the Riku family regain their memories of Kuros, and this was handled incredibly well in the anime, and given the proper amount of time and build-up that the manga just didn't quite have the time for. Like seeing Riku, Viola, and especially Rebecca remember someone that meant so much to them was yet another incredibly emotional and cathartic moment, and I thought the anime did a great job with this as well. Even on one leg, Kuros manages to get the jump on Doflamingo and slices his head off right away. But obviously, we all know that Doflamingo isn't going down that easily. But this was still a sight to behold. And I love how Luffy is initially disappointed that he wasn't the one able to take down Doflamingo. But how Kuros is able to balance and still fight on one leg is insane. And it's really only possible due to anime logic and physics. But, I'm still fine with it. I love Kuros. Now, shifting gears back in the tournament, if you can even call it that at this point, Sabo decides it's now time to finish this once and for all and shows off his immense power by literally blowing up the entire ring with what I can only assume is through haki being almost injected into the floor, in this case being the core of the ring, making it appear to explode from the inside, causing all the fighting fish to start thrashing out of the water. But more importantly, it creates a situation that is incredibly disadvantageous for Burgess, who no longer has good footing and is not nearly as nimble as Sabo. But more importantly, it is devastating for Diamante, who is a devil fruit user, allowing Sabo to be the only one who has a clear path to the Meta Meta fruit and victory. And finally, the moment has come. Ace's Meta Meta powers have been inherited by the person probably the most worthy of it, his brother Sabo. The first move he uses with it is, of course, Ace's signature move, Hiken, or Fire Fist. And Toei, realizing how significant this moment is, decided to invest a little bit more time and money for this scene. And you can tell it's noticeably better animated with better shading, better lighting, more fluid animation, and better character design as well. So yeah, kudos to them for taking the time to sort of give this moment its just flowers. And as awesome as the moment where Sabo gets the Meta Meta fruit was, that's not even the highlight of this episode, because the real high point of this episode, and one of the many high points of the Dressrosa arc, is what's to come in the final third of episode 678. The birth of a hero and the legend of God Usopp. So Hyruden, feeling immense gratitude towards the sacrifice Usopp made to save him and the others, pick him up despite Usopp's inaudible pleas to stop moving him because he is so gravely injured, and presents him to everyone so that they can witness for their eyes who their savior is. And I can't tell you how much I freaking love this moment when I first read this. He's held up like this Christ figure in sort of that cross sort of figure, and the ground coincidentally crumbling up from above them, letting the light shine through, illuminating him like some sort of holy being, and everyone believing this to be some kind of divine being. And this moment is equal parts hilarious, awesome, and hype all at the same time. And it's hard to even put into words how I felt about this moment in the series when I first read this chapter, because it was just so amazing. The part that I love the most about this scene and why it got me so hype is that not only does this make the lie about him being a hero true, but this felt like the first real step towards one of Usopp's earliest and most often used lie, basically beginning to come true, and that is his I have an army of 8,000 people. Now, I don't think there's close to 8,000 people here, but there's definitely a few hundred people down here who now essentially worship the ground that Usopp walks on and are willing to fight for him, which again, I find absolutely hysterical and awesome. And I always expected this lie to eventually come true, like many of the other ones up till now at some point in this series. But it was awesome to see that this finally started to come together, and that 8,000 people army lie is like slowly starting to become true. And I have no doubt that by the end of the series, Usopp will have 8,000 or more people basically fighting for him, where that is sort of the lie that comes true. But with that, he gets elevated from Captain Usopp to God Usopp, and with that new level of support from people wanting to repay him with their gratitude, he asks them to destroy the factory and rescue the remaining Tontara behind them. Even seeing like Abdullah and Jeet willing to follow Usopp is just the cherry on top, because these guys, you don't really see them as sort of someone who would follow someone, but even they're like influenced by Usopp's sort of divine intervention, which is insane. Now, one thing I was impressed by was the translation, was how, with how well they actually managed to translate the wordplay of Usopp accidentally saying, "You people will be guided by me," because that had to have been a nightmare for the translators to manage, because not only did they have to translate what Usopp was actually saying, but then make it fit by still being able to pick out certain syllables to form the phrase, "You people will be guided by me," in English. So yeah, to kind of go over how that was accomplished. So in Japanese, what Usopp was actually trying to say was, "Orose omae, tachi warui na, meiwaku o ore no gamen miro, chi ga bachiri da, kuso tare." So in English, that basically translates to, "Put me down, you're the worst. This is really annoying. Look at my face. It's soaked in blood, you shithead." And what they ended up coming up with in English is, "Put me down, you idiot. People like you are the worst. Will you stop? Hey, beefy guy, open your blinded eyes. Blood is all over my face, meathead." And which honestly is amazing how they managed to get basically the gist of what Usopp said in Japanese and still managed to be able to use it in a way to form the "you people will be guided by me." And so yeah, when I first saw this translation in both the manga and in the anime, I found it pretty impressive how they managed to do that. Overall, the birth of God Usopp is one of my all-time favorite scenes in this series. It manages to be insanely funny, but also equally epic at the same time, which is basically Usopp's sort of guiding principle in terms of his character. Now, during all this, everyone up in the Colosseum comes crashing into the underground area, where we finally get the full reveal of Sabo, Koala, and Hack being part of the Revolutionary Army. And with his clothes returned to him by Koala, Sabo literally looks exactly like a grown-up version of his kid version from the flashback, wearing the same overcoat, top hat with the goggles, and the frilled shirt, right down to also still carrying around that metal pipe on his back, even while he can use like Haki and Ryusoken and now Ace's meta powers. Like, it's kind of overkill, I feel like, to carry that, or useless to carry around that metal pipe. But most touching of all, though, is how he talks about Luffy when explaining the real identities of both people disguised as Lucy to Rebecca. He specifically refers to him as the future Pirate King and his little brother who hasn't changed since they were little. And I love that even decades later, he's still the more conventionally supportive older brother who always has been the more mature of the older brothers. This quick scene always warms my heart a bit. It's here we also learn why the Revolutionary Army are actually here on Dressrosa. They're here for the weapons that are being distributed, causing war all over the region. But it seems the weapons are being produced somewhere else, and Dressrosa kind of serves as only the distribution center. And it's also here that we get a really cool reunion of Robin and the Revolutionary Army folks that she spent her 2-year time skip with. And what's crazy is when you actually think about it, Robin has spent more time with them than she has spent with her Straw Hats, because she spent 2 full years with them, while with the Straw Hats, I think canonically, she's only been with them for maybe just under a year, or maybe even less, now that I think about it, because she joined basically at the beginning of the sort of the paradise side of Grand Line. So yeah, it's probably even less. But of course, that none of that really matters considering just how close she is with the Straw Hats. The other hilarious highlight of this moment is that Bartolomeo gets to be face to face with yet another Straw Hat, and he starts to further fanboy over being in the presence of Robin. But the best is when he learns of Usopp. At first, he's like, "Who's Usopp?" Because, like everyone else, his wanted poster is only mentioned as Sogeking, so he had no idea about who Usopp is. But I love that almost instantly he deduces that Sogeking's real identity is Usopp, mostly because of the nose, and again starts to go wild. And honestly, I will never grow tired of Bartolomeo fanboying over the Straw Hats, because that is exactly how I'd respond to seeing any one of them too. And so I always love inserting myself in as Bartolomeo, because that would be me. Now, interspersed during these scenes, we also get an update on what Zoro and Kinemon are also up to as well. And in classic fashion, Zoro has found himself lost and somehow way outside the castle, somehow losing sight of someone as large as Pika, of all people. But Pika, we know, ran away to go help Doflamingo. Kinemon finds himself, though, in the underground looking for Kanjuro, but I love that along the way, he's helped out and is carrying the injured Tontara warriors from their encounters with Laoji and Gladius, which is, I think, a very sweet thing. Like, it's not really, like, highlighted or anything, but if you look, he's basically carrying, like, 3 of them in his arms as he's kind of moving his way through. And I really enjoyed that little detail. Now, to cap off this set of episodes, we get back to the Suits Chamber, where Kyros is still on a rampage, quickly taking out Buffalo, kind of like almost killing him, I feel like, and knocking away Baby 5, while Luffy and Viola work to free Law and get the handcuffs off him. Now, Luffy and Law's interactions are always amazing, but this is probably one of the better ones too. Law may be done with their alliance, but Luffy sure isn't, and neither are we. Law telling Luffy their alliance is over, and that once he removes the cuffs that he will kill them, while Luffy just calling the kettle black is an understatement, as he says that Law is being selfish by one-sidedly ending their alliance, while Luffy is being just as, if not more selfish, by saying, "I will make those decisions when the alliance is over." It's just classic Luffy. Then it gets even funnier when Law is being all serious and brooding, saying he's gonna kill him when he's free, but Luffy is just trying his darndest to put the key into the cuffs, but he can't keep his hands still since it's sea stone cuffs. But sadly, Viola is also a Devil Fruit user, so neither of them can actually get the key into the cuffs keyhole. And this scene is just pure fun for me. I love moments like this where you have these sort of intense stakes where you know you have to get these cuffs off before inevitably Doflamingo resurrects himself, and it becomes a terrible situation. But you have Luffy kind of just standing there, like squinting his eyes, struggling to keep his hand from shaking while trying to do something as trivial as fit a key into a handcuff, while he's trying to argue with Viola about having her do it, who's just as much falling into kind of Luffy's pace. It's all so good. And of course, the episode ends on a cliffhanger that obviously Doflamingo is far from dead, and now Pika has made his way back to the Suits Chamber as well. And it almost seems like even Baby 5 and Gladius were not aware of the fact that Doflamingo had the ability to do whatever he just did here to make himself alive again, essentially, after being, decapitated. And I think myself and the prevailing theory among most of the community when this chapter dropped was that this was some sort of a puppet. And since, Doflamingo's powers and his sort of character, it revolves around him being essentially the puppet master. And, we all thought that what Kyros actually sliced off was some sort of a puppet and not the real Doflamingo, which, is pretty obvious at this point. I think that's where the prevailing consensus was going. But yeah, this is it though. We are finally heading into the formal climax and the main conflict of the Dressrosa arc, with Doflamingo teasing something called the birdcage that gets even Law scared and rattled. So it'll be interesting to see what that actually means, whether he's going to basically imprison everyone in a cage made of his strings. So yeah, that'll be kind of crazy to see what that actually is. But anyways, that's kind of where we'll end this episode. And yeah, if you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment. And if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. check out my Instagram at SunnyGo Podcast with updates of new episodes and to see pictures of my manga collection and card collection. And of course, like I've always said, just listening to the podcast is enough for me, but if you feel like supporting me, please feel free to support me via my Buy Me a Coffee profile. And as always, I wanted to thank you for taking the time to listen to my podcast. Just a tiny spoiler section, but if you're not interested in that, feel free to stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye! Alrighty, so spoiler section. Yeah, like I always say, spoiler sections are mostly just me kind of rambling. But yeah, one thing I noticed with this rewatch after watching Wano is that the moves that Sabo uses, like Ryu no Ibiki or the Dragon's Breath, as well as Ryusoken in general, seems to be built on the same principles of what would later be known as Ryu-O, which is what Luffy learns from Hyogoro in Wano. That basically is sort of the advanced use of armament haki, or the ability to use haki to inject it into something. And it seems like the Ryusoken uses sort of that same principle. I don't know if they're the exact same thing, but it can't be a coincidence that they're both based on sort of the dragon's motif, with both being Ryusoken and Ryu-O. And so Ryu meaning dragon in Japanese. And so, yeah, I can't help but see that parallel in the sense that they both seem to work the same way, in that you basically inject your haki into something so that it explodes inside out. Obviously with Sabo, he has to basically put his hand into something, while Luffy eventually learns to do it by basically projecting it out. He doesn't even need to make contact with his target. So I think that's the difference between Ryusoken and Ryu-O, is that Ryu-O is sort of the progression of Ryusoken and the sort of more advanced usage of haki. So yeah, I thought that was really interesting. I don't know if I don't know if that's ever been confirmed, and I haven't bothered to look it up. But that's kind of my interpretation of it. The other interesting thing is, now knowing that Luffy is the sun god Nika, who goes around liberating slaves and anyone who's been oppressed, you can't help but see the parallels of God Usopp and his sort of origins. Like, it's very similar. Like, God Usopp, he's bathed in light shown from outside, and it looks like the sun is shining down on him. He just freed a huge number of, slaves and prisoners. And it's kind of fun to see the fact that not only is Luffy sort of the sun god and the warrior of liberation, but one of his best friends, to a lesser extent, is almost the same thing. And now knowing that Luffy is a literal god and Usopp is a figurative god, it's just funny to see this parallel and watching this scene, now knowing what Luffy actually is. And I just love the scene even more now because of that connection. And then lastly, obviously, the one thing I wanted to mention is, with the weapons and stuff, we learned that the weapons aren't being produced in Dressrosa, but in fact, they are being produced in Wano and being shipped out here, because that's what Kaido and Doflamingo's relationship is. Sort of all of that is that Doflamingo will provide him with the smile fruits, and then Kaido will then provide Doflamingo with weapons and all that stuff. And so, yeah, it's something that's definitely explored later on. But it is interesting that Oda has already sort of laid the seeds for Wano at this point in that regard as well. So, like, just seeing this entire saga, like, Oda clearly has Wano and all of its sort of implications all planned out, whether it be Doflamingo or Momonosuke, Kinemon, Law, Luffy, and Kaido and all that stuff. All of that is already basically planned out, which is insane, because, like, from this point on, Wano doesn't even start for another 5-6 years. And so, yeah, it's insane. I'm always marveling at all the little things that Oda drops throughout the arcs that won't be paid off for another like half a decade. And And so, yeah, I really enjoyed that and seeing those little things come up every now and then. But anyways, that's kind of all I really wanted to talk about for the spoiler sections for these episodes. So thanks for sticking around, and I hope to see you on the next episode. See ya!